At dusk, a man sits by his fire on the endless grasslands of ancient Siberia. The wind moves low across the steppe, whispering through dry stalks and carrying the faint scent of earth and ash. His hands, rough from the hunt, reach for anything that will keep the flame alive through the night. He tosses a handful of dried leaves into the embers. Nothing special, just something that burns. But then, something happens. The air changes. The smoke curls differently this time, sweeter, thicker, almost inviting. He leans closer, frowning first, then smiling as the unfamiliar scent fills his lungs. Around him, the camp quiets. The horses shift. The stars, already bright above, seem to draw a little nearer. He doesn't have a name for it. Not yet. But somewhere in that soft haze, curiosity is born, the first spark of a relationship between human and plant that will travel across millennia. Long before anyone spoke of medicine or mischief, before it was praised or forbidden, the cannabis plant lived quietly among people like him. It grew where the soil was kind and the sun forgiving, its leaves turning with the seasons, its fibres tough enough to bind a spear, weave a net or hold a shelter against the wind. Its seeds fed the hungry, its stalks clothed the shivering, and its smoke, well, that was an accident. A happy one. Across generations, those same hands learned to twist the fibres into rope, to spin them into thread. Villages rose along the rivers where hemp grew thick, and what began as survival slowly became craft. The plant that once sparked a hunter's curiosity became a partner in daily life, humble, reliable, and quietly generous. It's strange how often the great stories of humanity begin like this, not with grand plans or royal decrees, but with a simple act of curiosity beside a fire, someone wondering, what happens if I try this? And sometimes that question reshapes the world. For that man on the steppe, the night passes like any other. The fire burns low, the stars fade, and dawn paints the plains in gold. But in the smoke that drifted skyward, something invisible lingered, the start of an ancient friendship between people and a plant, one that would follow humanity wherever it roamed. Because history, for all its empires and inventions, often begins the same way, with someone sitting quietly by the fire, following the scent of something new. Morning drifts slowly over the fields of ancient China. Mist rises from the riverbanks, turning the world soft and silver. In the distance, a farmer bends low among tall green stalks that sway gently in the wind. His hands move with practiced grace, cutting, stripping, weaving, turning rough stems into thread, rope, and the fabric of everyday life. The smell of dew and fibre hangs in the air. It is the scent of work, of rhythm, of continuity. They say it was Shen Nong, the divine farmer, who first taught the people how to live with the land rather than against it. A ruler, a healer, and a legend all at once. He walked the countryside, tasting every plant, searching for what could heal and what could harm. In the stories, he had a transparent body so he could watch how each herb moved through him, which sounds like ancient poetry, but also like a man willing to suffer for science. Among the thousands of plants he studied, one stood out for its quiet versatility: cannabis. It didn't call attention to itself. It wasn't bright or fragrant or rare, but it was generous. From its seeds came nourishment. From its stalks came shelter. From its leaves came relief for pain, fever, and sleepless nights. It was the kind of plant that fits seamlessly into daily life. Practical, patient, dependable, a trait many farmers might admire in both crops and people. In the philosophy of the time, healing wasn't about conquering illness but restoring balance. The world was shaped by opposites: yin and yang, cold and warm, rest and motion. Health came when these forces danced together in harmony. Illness, then, was not punishment but imbalance, a reminder to listen. Shen Nong believed that every sickness carried its own remedy somewhere in nature, waiting to be found by hands humble enough to dig for it. Imagine those early healers at work, quiet courtyards lined with clay jars, the soft clink of pestles, the smell of herbs drying in the sun. A mother brings her child with a fever. An old man arrives with aching joints. The healer grinds the plant into powder, mixes it with honey or wine, and speaks gently, not of miracles but of patience. Healing took time, like seasons returning. Centuries would pass, and the empire would rise and fall, but the rhythm stayed. Fields of hemp still shimmered in the wind, ropes still bound fishing nets, oil still soothed weary hands. In those small, enduring acts, the divine farmer's wisdom lived on, the belief that nature does not serve us, it partners with us. And perhaps that's the quiet lesson they left behind, that the earth, if treated with respect, will offer medicine for our bodies and meaning for our days. It doesn't demand devotion or ceremony, only care. Somewhere between the sunlit rows of hemp and the healer's worn hands, humanity learned something rare. Not how to rule the world, but how to belong to it. The wind never stops on the Central Asian steppe. It rolls across the land like a living thing, bending the tall grass, rattling the tents, and carrying the smell of horses, earth, and wood smoke. The sky stretches endlessly. No walls, no borders, just distance. Out here, around 1000 BC, the Scythians make their home. Fierce riders, hunters, and keepers of stories that move as freely as they do. At night, when the air turns sharp and the stars burn like ice, a small fire glows inside a round felt tent. Men and women gather close, their faces lit by amber light. In the centre, a bronze bowl stands on hot stones, filled with hemp seeds and flowers. When they drop the seeds into the fire, the smoke thickens instantly, white, fragrant, rising like a slow prayer. Someone laughs softly, another hums an old melody. The air grows hazy, warm, and strangely calm. This is not entertainment. It is ceremony. The Scythians believe the smoke carries the soul, that in death, as in life, nothing travels alone. When someone passes, the tribe builds a tent like this one and fills it with scent and song. They burn the plant until the air trembles, until grief gives way to silence. The smoke rises through the roof flap and out into the freezing dark, a bridge from the living to the departed. Centuries later, the Greek historian Herodotus would write of this strange custom with both awe and confusion. He described how these nomads inhaled the vapour and shouted for joy. To him, it was wild. To them, it was sacred. Perhaps both were true. In that thin air where the line between body and spirit blurred, they believed they were closer to the ancestors, closer to the truth that breath itself was holy. Outside the tent, the night remains vast and still. Horses stamp and snort softly, their breath turning to clouds in the cold. The fire crackles, the smell of hemp and pine lingers in the air. Above it all, the stars look down, the same stars that watched the first fires in Siberia, and the same that will one day shine over temples and cities far away. For the Scythians, smoke was never just a smell. It was a passage from body to soul, from earth to sky, from memory to meaning. In every curl that drifted upward, they saw a promise that nothing truly disappears, it only changes form. And long after the fires went out, that belief, that quiet hope, continued to rise. The dawn in ancient India begins with sound, the low hum of prayer, the rustle of palms, the crackle of firewood burning in small temple courtyards. A golden haze floats above the Ganges as the world wakes slowly, the river glinting like liquid sunlight. Along its banks, men and women prepare offerings, milk, honey, and leaves, simple things. But in their simplicity lies devotion. Among those leaves is one that carries a quiet kind of reverence, the plant they call Bhang. Its scent is sharp, green, and earthy, its touch cool against the skin. In the old Vedic hymns, it is not just a plant but a blessing, said to spring from the ocean itself during the churning of the cosmic sea. The ancients believed it was a gift from the gods, a bridge between thought and peace, between body and spirit, and so it found its way into the hands of priests and poets, of ascetics and kings. It was mixed with milk, with ghee, with a little sugar and spice, and then offered to Shiva, the god of meditation, stillness, and cosmic dance. The drink was not meant for escape, it was meant for presence, to calm the noise within, to find the rhythm of the universe breathing quietly through all living things. During Mahashivaratri, when night itself is considered sacred, the air fills with chanting. Bells echo through the temples, candles flicker like stars, and the faithful gather in celebration. Bowls of Bhang are passed from hand to hand, each sip taken not for pleasure but for purity. The taste is faintly bitter, the effect gentle, a warmth that spreads slowly through the body, softening thought, opening space for stillness. Some smile, some sway with the rhythm of the drums, others close their eyes and drift inward. In those quiet moments there is no distance between the divine and the human, only breath, heartbeat, and light. It's easy, from the comfort of today, to see only the surface, to think of the drink as a relic or a curiosity. But beneath the ritual lies something timeless, a truth that every civilization, in its own way, has tried to express. That the divine is not always found in thunder or miracles, but sometimes in the smallest act of awareness, a leaf in water, a flame in darkness, a whisper of smoke. For the people of ancient India, Bhang was not a doorway to forgetfulness. It was a reminder that peace was not somewhere far above the world, but already within it, waiting, patient as the dawn. Evening settles over the old lands of Persia, where the sand still holds the day's warmth, and the air hums with a quiet kind of wisdom. Inside a small temple, the light of an oil lamp flickers on carved walls, its flame steady but never still. A circle of priests sits cross-legged on woven mats. Between them burns a bronze vessel, releasing a thin, fragrant smoke that curls upward like a question reaching for the heavens. This was no ordinary gathering. These were followers of Zarathustra, seekers of truth who believed that the universe itself was a careful balance between light and darkness, order and chaos. To them, smoke was not merely perfume for the gods. It was a bridge between thought and revelation. Inhaling deeply, they believed they could quiet the noise of the mortal world long enough to hear the whisper of Asha, divine truth, the pattern that holds everything together. The plant that made this possible was known by many names, but its spirit was familiar, the same humble cannabis that had travelled across mountains and empires, finding new purpose in every land it touched. To the Zoroastrian priests, it was a sacred aid, not to lose the mind, but to see it more clearly. The smoke softened the edges of ordinary perception, helping them imagine what lies beyond the veil of sight. Outside, in the royal gardens of Persepolis, poets found their own kind of inspiration. They spoke of the soul as a flickering flame inside a vessel of clay. The smoke rises, one wrote, as if the heart remembers where it came from. In those words, reflection became devotion. The act of breathing, that simple, fragile rhythm, became a prayer. Not all who watched understood. Some called it folly, others called it faith. But for the thinkers of that age, intoxication was never about escape. It was about turning inward, about letting the senses soften so that thought could travel farther. The priest said that when the body is quiet, the soul begins to speak, and when the smoke clears, what remains is light. Perhaps that is the thread that runs through every civilization touched by this ancient plant. The search for what lies just beyond ordinary awareness. The Persians gave that search a shape, a ceremony, a philosophy. They didn't worship the smoke, they listened to it. And in doing so, they left behind a truth that feels remarkably modern, that the mind, like the universe, expands best when it is both awake and at peace. Somewhere in that balance, between reason and wonder, between breath and silence, humanity first began to glimpse its own inner light. The sun rises over the Nile like a slow exhale, washing the desert in gold. The river glitters as if carrying bits of the sky itself, and the sound of oars drifts softly from the morning mist. On its banks, a small workshop comes to life, not the grand hall of a pharaoh, but a humble room filled with jars, oils, and the steady patience of healers who have learned to read the language of plants. Inside, a scribe unrolls a sheet of papyrus, its surface covered in careful symbols, notes on fever, pain, and remedies gathered over generations. Beside him, a healer grinds leaves and seeds into fine powder, mixing them with honey and palm oil. The scent that rises is rich and earthy, faintly sweet. It's the smell of cannabis, one of many gifts from the Nile's fertile banks. In ancient Egypt, healing was an art as sacred as architecture. The same civilization that built tombs for eternity also worried tenderly over toothaches and childbirth pains. Cannabis found its place among their medicines, blended into balms to ease swelling, soothe aching muscles, and calm troubled sleep. Some recipes even called for it to quiet the spirit, to steady the heart before prayer or death. Far from the marketplace, in the shaded halls of temples, priests burned the same plant as incense. The air shimmered with the fragrance of myrrh, frankincense, and hemp, curling upward toward painted ceilings where gods watched from golden stone. The priests believed that scent carried prayers faster than words, that in the rising smoke the human and the divine could meet halfway. and in the silence of burial chambers, traces of cannabis oil have been found on the linen wrappings of mummies. Perhaps it was meant to comfort the dead as it had comforted the living, a final kindness beneath the weight of eternity. Even in a culture that spoke endlessly of afterlife, there was tenderness for the body left behind. Egypt has always seemed larger than life, pyramids, dynasties, and gods who ruled the stars. But beneath that grandeur, there was always something disarmingly human. The search for small mercies. A mother soothing her child, a healer stirring oil at dawn, a priest lighting the evening flame. In a land where kings sought immortality, ordinary people sought something humbler, and, in its own way, just as divine, relief, rest, and peace enough to face another day. Because even under the fiercest sun, humanity still reached for comfort in familiar forms, a leaf, a scent, a breath of smoke rising gently toward the sky. The Aegean morning begins with laughter and argument, two sounds the Greeks considered essential for learning. In a courtyard shaded by olive trees, students gather around a man with a calm face and a restless mind. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, dips a reed into ink and writes carefully, his words echoing what healers before him had already learned, that nature, in her quiet generosity, often holds the cure before we even name the disease. He describes a plant with tall stalks and narrow leaves, useful for easing pain and cooling fever. Its fibres make ropes strong enough to carry the weight of ships, yet its seeds calm the restlessness of the human heart. Hemp, or cannabis, had earned a place both in the doctor's kit and in the sailor's hands. In Greece, practicality and philosophy often walked side by side, a lesson that life and labour were never truly separate. By the time the Romans came to power, the plant had travelled west with trade and conquest. In the harbours of Ostia, men hauled bundles of hemp onto ships bound for Africa and Britain. Its fibres were twisted into ropes, woven into sails, and soaked in oil to resist the sea's salt and fury. The great Roman fleets, those proud symbols of empire, quite literally depended on the strength of a plant that asked for nothing more than sunlight and patience. Yet, in the candlelit rooms of scholars and poets, hemp had another reputation. The philosophers of Rome wrote about moderation, about how the body's pleasures and the soul's pursuits were forever negotiating terms. Public virtue demanded restraint, but private curiosity has always found its own quiet corners. Some mixed hemp oil into wine to calm the mind or steady the nerves before sleep. Others, like the Greek physician Dioscorides, praised its medicinal oils for their gentleness, though he warned with a wry smile between lines that too much makes one laugh too easily, and so the plant lived two lives, one in the marketplace, where it bound ships and fed the economy, the other in the study, where it stirred reflection and softened the edges of thought. It served both the builder and the dreamer, the soldier and the scholar. In that way, hemp mirrored the world it grew in. Practical by day, philosophical by night, it stood at the meeting point of labour and leisure, a witness to both the sweat of men and the stillness of contemplation. Perhaps that's why it endured through so many ages. Empires rise and fall, philosophies shift like tides, but the balance between work and wonder remains. From the harbours of Rome to the temples of Greece, hemp quietly reminded humankind of a simple truth. The same hands that build can also heal, and the same world that demands effort also offers peace, if only we take the time to breathe it in. The wind rolls gently over the desert, carrying the scent of cinnamon, leather, and smoke. A caravan of camels moves slowly across the dunes, their shadows stretching long under the evening sun. Bells tied to their necks chime softly, marking the rhythm of a journey that connects worlds. This is the Silk Road, a path not carved by kings, but by countless footsteps, hooves, and wheels over centuries. Among bolts of silk, jars of spices, and bags of tea, another traveller moves quietly from east to west. Cannabis. Packed as seed, leaf, or resin, it finds its way into saddlebags beside myrrh and frankincense. It doesn't announce itself with grandeur. It simply goes where people go, following the same human needs for comfort, trade, and story. At night, when the desert cools and the stars appear one by one, the travellers gather around small fires. Merchants, scholars, and wanderers share food, water, and tales in half a dozen languages. Someone passes around a bowl of warm milk mixed with crushed leaves, a gift from a Persian trader who swears it eases the dust in the lungs and the ache in the bones. The smoke that drifts upward carries laughter, and for a moment strangers become companions. In the early centuries of Islam, this humble traveller took on a new name, hashish. It appeared in quiet courtyards and busy ports, carried by mystics and merchants alike. While wine was forbidden, the plant found a gentler welcome among some who sought peace not through indulgence but through stillness. A small puff, a soft sigh, a few verses whispered under the breath, and suddenly the noise of the world faded into the rhythm of prayer. The poets of the time wrote of it with affection and caution in equal measure. They spoke of smoke that made the heart light and the tongue loose with love. Some found in it a companion to solitude, others a spark for song. To them, hashish was less rebellion than reflection, a reminder that joy, too, could be sacred if carried with grace. From oasis to port city, the plant crossed boundaries the way music does, quietly, effortlessly, with no regard for map or creed. Alongside fabrics and philosophies, it became part of the great exchange that defined the ancient world. Ideas, spices, and stories blended together until no one could say where one culture ended and another began. And perhaps that was the real miracle of the Silk Road, not the wealth it created, but the understanding it carried. In the swirl of dust and laughter, of prayer and smoke, people discovered that what travels fastest across the world is not gold or goods, but the simple desire to feel at peace, even if only for the length of a breath beneath the stars. Night has fallen over the cities of the Middle East. The call to prayer fades into the quiet hum of distant streets, and lanterns glow softly behind latticed windows. In a narrow alley, hidden behind the spice market, a small courtyard flickers with lamplight. Inside, a group of men sit cross-legged on woven mats, their eyes calm, their laughter low and unhurried. Between them burns a small clay bowl, releasing a thin thread of fragrant smoke into the still air. These are Sufis, seekers of the divine not through dogma but through experience. They live in a world bound by faith and law, yet they search for a path that leads inward, toward the heart. To them, love is the true religion, and silence is the purest prayer. Some seek this stillness in dance, some in music, and others in the gentle cloud of hashish smoke that softens thought and opens the soul. They call it the herb of understanding, not a drug, not an escape, but a doorway to clarity. When the mind quiets, one Sufi poet writes, the heart remembers where it came from. The smoke curls upward, and for a moment the world feels wide and forgiving. In that hush, words fall away, and what remains is something wordless, a deep, familiar peace. Of course, not everyone approved. The scholars debated, the clerics condemned. The law drew lines where the spirit saw only circles. But the Sufis, with their patience and gentle humour, often smiled at such boundaries. They did not argue. They simply returned to their gardens, their songs, their long nights of reflection. They believed that the soul could not be contained by decree, and that no one could forbid what blooms quietly inside the heart. In the dim corners of old Cairo and Damascus, travellers once found hashish dens, not places of corruption, but small sanctuaries of smoke and poetry. There, merchants, mystics, and wanderers shared verses, sipped tea, and slipped into stillness together. The sound of the outside world grew faint. Inside, the air smelled of rosewater and calm. For a few hours, class and creed dissolved, and every man became simply a seeker. Even now, the stories linger, of nights filled with song and starlight, of laughter that echoed like prayer. The Sufis taught that the truest freedom was not found in the marketplace or the throne room, but in the quiet garden of the self. To be free, they said, was not to run away from the world, but to sit within it without fear. And so, beneath the desert moon, as the smoke drifts into the dark, their lesson remains, that peace is not given by law or taken by rule. It waits, gently, within, like a garden that grows only when the heart is still enough to notice it. The bells of the monastery ring at dawn, their sound rolling gently across misty fields. Inside thick stone walls, monks rise from wooden cots, their robes brushing the cold floor as they move toward prayer. Outside, the gardens wait. Rows of herbs, vegetables, and tall green stalks of hemp swaying softly in the morning light. The same hands that copy scripture by candlelight also till the soil, because even in a house of God someone must keep the roof patched and the rope strong. In medieval Europe, faith ruled not only the soul but the senses. Every act carried a moral weight, every pleasure a warning. Yet necessity, ever practical, had its own theology. Hemp was a gift too useful to refuse. Its fibres became rope for bells, sails for ships, thread for clothing, and oil for lamps that burned through the long winter nights. Monks grew it quietly behind cloister walls, calling it simply useful, but outside those walls the stories grew louder, stories of villagers who burned its flowers, who inhaled the smoke and laughed too freely. Soon whispers spread. The herb of the devil. The church found itself in an uneasy dance. On one hand, hemp was essential, a servant of industry, a partner to prayer. On the other, its intoxicating cousin carried a reputation that smelled faintly of sin. To enjoy the plant's gentler gifts was tolerated, to seek its wilder ones was temptation. And so the church drew a careful line, one that blurred as easily as ink on wet parchment. In the fields beyond the monastery walls, farmers harvested hemp with reverence, unaware of its moral complications. They saw only work, the rhythm of scythe and sun, the feel of coarse fibre between their fingers. For them, sin was something that happened in sermons, not in the soil. Inside the scriptorium, a young monk pauses his writing to rub his wrist, sore from hours of copying psalms. He dips a cloth into hemp seed oil and massages it gently. The ache eases. He smiles, whispers a quiet "thanks," and returns to his task. Perhaps he never wonders whether that moment of comfort is holy or forbidden. Perhaps it doesn't matter. In truth, the dilemma was not about plants or pleasure. It was about fear, the fear of what lies beyond understanding. In every age, the unknown becomes dangerous until it is named, and the sacred and the sinful often share the same root. By nightfall, the monastery falls silent again. The lamps flicker with hemp oil. The wind moves softly through the fields, carrying a faint grassy sweetness through the cloister halls. Faith and necessity rest side by side, as they always have, two human instincts bound together like threads in the same rope. And maybe that's the lesson left behind in those quiet, disciplined gardens, that belief and need are not enemies, but companions trying to live under the same sky, one seeking heaven, the other simply trying to keep the lamps lit until morning. The sea was never still in the 15th century. It breathed and roared, stretched and shimmered, calling restless men toward horizons they could barely imagine. Wooden ships creaked in the harbours of Lisbon, Seville and London, their decks heavy with barrels, maps and dreams of gold. Above them the sails swelled proudly in the wind, white as cloud, strong as faith. And woven through every inch of those ships was a quiet, familiar thread, hemp. Without it, there would have been no voyages, no new worlds, no empire. The ropes that held the masts, the canvas that caught the wind, even the oakum that sealed the planks, all were made from hemp. Each voyage began not with a prayer or a cannon, but with the harvest of a humble plant that grew in muddy fields far from the sea. In the shipyards of Europe, the smell of tar, salt and hemp filled the air. Workers twisted long fibres into thick rope, singing to keep rhythm as they pulled and spun. The process was back-breaking, but the result, a rope that could hold a ship steady through a storm, felt almost miraculous. The sailors didn't think of philosophy or politics as they worked. They just thanked the rope that didn't snap and the sail that didn't tear. When Columbus crossed the Atlantic, when Magellan circled the globe, when Dutch and English ships chased the monsoon winds toward Asia, hemp was there, woven into every inch of their ambition. The plant that once wrapped around farmers' hands now wrapped around the planet itself, tying continents together in trade, conquest and curiosity. It's a strange irony, really. The same plant that soothed pain, eased sleep, and brought stillness to monks and mystics also carried cannons, soldiers and explorers across the seas. It comforted the body and expanded the world, one gentle, one ruthless. Humanity, it seems, has always asked its tools to serve both compassion and conquest. And so, hemp became the unspoken hero of the age of exploration, the quiet partner behind the bravado of discovery. While captains claimed glory and nations drew new borders, the plant simply did what it had always done, hold things together. By night, when the waves rose high and the stars hung low, sailors would sit on the deck, the hemp ropes humming softly in the wind. The sea would sigh, the ship would creak, and for a moment they might have felt what all explorers eventually learn, that the world is vast, fragile, and bound by threads we rarely see. And somewhere in that sound, the gentle groan of rope against wood, lay a kind of poetry. the reminder that even history's grandest journeys depend on the simplest of things grown quietly in the soil waiting to be useful. By the time the Renaissance dawned, Europe had begun to remember what it once knew, that knowledge, like a buried seed, always finds a way to grow again. After centuries of superstition and silence, curiosity returned, and with it came the bold belief that reason could illuminate even the mysteries once left to faith. In this new light, old plants were rediscovered. Scholars in robes and spectacles pored over ancient manuscripts from Arabia, India, and Greece. Apothecaries reopened dusty jars labelled with strange names, and there, among them, stood a familiar friend, Cannabis, waiting patiently to be noticed again. In the laboratories of the 17th and 18th centuries, its green leaves were no longer a symbol of temptation or taboo, but a subject of fascination. Doctors and natural philosophers began to experiment, drying it, distilling it, steeping it in spirits to create tinctures. The results were promising. A few drops beneath the tongue eased pain, quieted coughing, and soothed the sleepless. In an age when surgery was brutal and infection common, any plant that brought peace without harm felt like a small miracle. By the 19th century, cannabis tincture had become a fixture in medicine cabinets across Europe and America. It was sold beside peppermint oil and quinine, advertised for everything from migraines to melancholy. A bottle could be found in a queen's physician's bag and in a farmer's cupboard alike. It was, in the language of the day, a gentle aid to the weary mind. But with progress came unease. As science pushed forward, society hesitated. The same plant that doctors praised began to earn whispers in salons and newspapers. Was it medicine or mischief? A blessing or a danger? The age that celebrated discovery also feared its own freedom. And so the pendulum swung, as it always does, between acceptance and alarm. Governments debated, moralists warned, and the plant slipped once more into the shadows. Yet it never truly disappeared. Soldiers carried it to dull pain on the battlefield. Poets used it to widen the borders of imagination. Mothers still kept it in small bottles for sleepless nights. It survived, quietly, between the cracks of law and necessity. Looking back, it is hard not to smile at the pattern. Every few centuries humanity rediscovers what it once forgot, then argues about it all over again. Curiosity leads, fear follows, and somewhere between the two, truth waits patiently. And perhaps that is the story of cannabis, not as a scandal or a saviour, but as a mirror. It reflects the eternal rhythm of human nature, our desire to understand, our tendency to worry, and our stubborn belief that peace, in any form, must always come with a price. Yet the plant endures, as it always has, quiet, resilient, unchanged. It asks for no faith and offers no rebellion, only the simple promise it gave on that first smoky night beside the fire, thousands of years ago, that comfort, when sought with care, can be both ancient and new.